Imagine yourself under the scorching sun of ancient Egypt, where the fields stretch as far as the eye can see and the Nile River meanders through the fertile lands. But amidst this majestic landscape, there are a people who suffer in silence. The children of Israel, once promised as princes of a land of milk and honey, are now forced to toil as slaves. Under the relentless rule of the pharaohs, they work tirelessly on the pyramids, fields, and monumental buildings of Egypt. Their calloused hands lift the stone blocks under the watchful eyes of the cruel foreman. The work is hard and incessant, and hope seems like a distant mirage in the scorching desert. They are deprived of their freedom, their dignity, and even their own time. Each dawn brings with it the same brutal routine of work and suffering as the sun sets on a life of slavery and oppression. But even in the darkness of slavery, there is a flame of hope that burns within them. They cry out to a God who seems distant but whose ears are attentive to their suffering. And it is this faith, this hope in a God who sees and hears them, that sustains them through the dark days of slavery. So what slavery was like in Egypt before they were freed is a story of pain and despair, but also of courage and resistance. It is a story of a people crying out for freedom, waiting for the day when God will free them from the chains of oppression and guide them to the land of promise. Before we head out to find out who led this movement to flee Egypt, leave a like on the video. So let's go. In the midst of this desolate landscape of slavery, a man emerges who will be fundamental to the liberation of the children of Israel. His name is Moses, a man who was once a prince in Pharaoh's palace, but now lives as a fugitive in the desert. One day, while shepherding his father-in-law's flock, Moses comes across an extraordinary sight, a burning bush that burns but is not consumed by fire. Intrigued, he approaches, and it is then that he hears a voice that echoes from the flames, a voice that calls him by name. "Moses, Moses," the voice resounds, and he responds, "Here I am." It is God who speaks to him, revealing his holy presence and his plan to free the people of Israel from the yoke of Egypt. God instructs Moses to return to Egypt and confront Pharaoh, demanding the release of his people. At first, Moses is reluctant, feeling incapable and unworthy of the task entrusted to him. But God assures him of his constant presence and promises to be with him every step of the way. With renewed courage and unshakable faith, Moses accepts the divine call and leaves for Egypt, taking with him the promise of liberation and redemption for his people. He knows that the journey will be difficult and dangerous, but he trusts in the God who called him, knowing that he is faithful to fulfill all his promises. Thus begins the saga of Moses, an ordinary man chosen by God for an extraordinary mission. He will be the liberator, the leader, and the prophet who will lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, guiding them to the land of promise and freedom. And it all begins with a simple call, a voice that echoes from the flames and changes the course of history forever. With determination and confidence, Moses returns to Egypt, ready to confront Pharaoh and demand the release of his people. He stands before Egypt's powerful leader and proclaims the words God gave him, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he refuses to give in to Moses' request. Instead, he increases the burden on the Israelites, making their slavery even more cruel and oppressive. Then, God sends a series of plagues upon Egypt, each one more terrible than the last. From the water of the Nile River turning to blood to the sky darkened by swarms of locusts, plagues are signs of divine power and a warning to Pharaoh. But even in the face of evidence of God's power, Pharaoh remains obstinate in his heart. He refuses to let the people of Israel leave, hardening his position with each new plague that falls on Egypt. For the Israelites, the plagues bring a mix of hope and fear. They witness the power of the God who will free them, but they also suffer the consequences of the plagues that ravage Egypt. And so, the plagues continue, one after another, until finally Pharaoh gives into the pressure and grants Moses and the people of Israel permission to leave Egypt. The plagues of Egypt are a reminder of God's power over all things and a demonstration of his faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. They are a prelude to the liberation to come, preparing the way for the next chapter in the story of the children of Israel, their escape from the land of slavery and the journey toward freedom. As the plagues of Egypt ravage the land, the people of Israel eagerly await the moment of deliverance. And that moment comes with celebration of Easter, a festival that will become an eternal milestone in the history of God's people. Moses instructs the Israelites to select a lamb without blemish and to sacrifice it at dusk. They must mark the doors of their houses with the blood of the lamb, so that death will not enter their homes. And so they do, faithfully obeying God's instructions. As the sun sets over Egypt, an atmosphere of tension and expectation fills the air. Families gather in their homes, protected by the blood of the Lamb, awaiting what is to come. And then, at midnight, the mighty hand of God passes through the land of Egypt, bringing death to the firstborn of every house except those marked with the blood of the Lamb. It is a night of lamentation and mourning for the Egyptians, but of liberation and joy for the Israelites. The next morning, Pharaoh finally gives in to pressure and orders Moses and his people to leave Egypt. The Israelites waste no time and begin their journey towards freedom, taking with them not only the spoils of Egypt, but also the promise of a new life in a land of promise. Easter thus becomes a feast of celebration and gratitude, a reminder of God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises and freeing his people from slavery. And as the Israelites depart Egypt, they take with them not only the memory of that fateful night, but also the hope of a bright future under God's protection and care. With hearts full of gratitude and hope, the children of Israel leave Egypt towards the unknown. Ahead of you is the vast desert, an arid and unforgiving land that will test your faith and trust in God. At the beginning, the journey is marked by the euphoria of liberation and the promise of a new life. But soon the reality of the desert imposes itself, with its scorching sands and freezing nights. Water is scarce, and food is even harder to find. It is in these moments of despair that God reveals his presence and his loving care for his people. He sends manna from heaven to feed the Israelites and makes water spring from the rock to quench the thirst of his thirsty people. These are daily miracles, constant reminders of God's power and goodness. They are proof that even in the driest desert, God is able to provide everything his people need. But the journey through the desert is not just a matter of physical survival. It is also a spiritual journey, an opportunity for the Israelites to grow in faith and trust in God. As they face the challenges of the desert, the Israelites are confronted with their own weaknesses and limitations. They complain and doubt, wondering if God has abandoned them to their fate. But even in the midst of your doubts and uncertainties, God remains faithful. He guides and protects them, leading them through the desert toward the land of promise. The desert is a crucial part of the Israelites' journey, a school of faith where they learn to trust God in all circumstances. And as they make their way through the desert, they know they are not alone. They have the constant presence of God, who guides and sustains them every step of the way. As the Israelites travel through the desert, they are led to a majestic mountain, the peak of which is lost in the clouds. It is Mount Sinai, the place where God chooses to reveal himself in a special way to his people. Moses is called to the top of the mountain, where he spends 40 days and 40 nights in communion with God. It is there that he receives the 10 Commandments, the divine law that will be the foundation of the life of the people of Israel. On Mount Sinai, God speaks directly to Moses, revealing his will and commandments to his people. He instructs them to love him above all else and to love their neighbors as themselves. He sets standards of righteousness and holiness, showing them the way to lives of obedience and blessing. The 10 Commandments are not just a set of rules to be followed, but rather the terms of a covenant between God and his people. It is a pact of love and fidelity, in which God commits to be their God and they commit to being his people. The revelation of the law on Mount Sinai is a moment of profound significance and importance in the history of the people of Israel. It is a reminder of God's commitment to guide and protect them, and of their responsibility to obey and honor God in all things. The Israelites descend from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments in hand, renewed in their commitment to God and their mission to be a holy and separate people for him. They now have a light to guide them on their way through the wilderness and toward the land of promise, where they hope to build a nation that honors and glorifies God's name. As they travel through the desert, the Israelites carry with them not only the 10 Commandments, but also an ancient and sacred promise, the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey, a land that God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This land is the Promised Land, a place of abundance and blessing, where the Israelites can live in peace and prosperity under God's protection. It is a destination of hope that sustains them through the difficult days and dark nights of the desert. The Promised Land represents not only a physical place, but also a state of being. It is a place where the Israelites can live in freedom and worship of God, fulfilling the purpose for which they were called. But the journey to the Promised Land will not be easy. They will face challenges and adversity along the way, including battles with powerful nations and trials in the desert. However, they have God's promise that he will be with them every step of the way. He will guide and protect them, strengthening them on their journey to the land of promise. And so, the Israelites continue their journey with their eyes fixed on the horizon, where the Promised Land shines like a guiding star. They know they still have a long way to go, but they trust in God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. The Promised Land is more than a geographic place. It is a symbol of hope and faith, a constant reminder that God is faithful to fulfill His promises and lead His people to their final destination. And as they advance towards the land of promise, the Israelites know that they have Almighty God at their side, guiding and protecting them on their journey of faith. As they reach the end of their journey through the desert, the Israelites see in the distance the land that was promised to them so long ago. It is a time of joy and gratitude as they have finally reached the destination of hope that God promised them. But this is not just a story from the past. It's a story that resonates in our hearts to this day, reminding us of the transformative power of faith and God's faithfulness in keeping His promises. Just as the Israelites were guided and protected by God on their journey, so we can trust His guidance and care in our own lives. He calls us to move forward in faith, knowing that He is with us every step of the way. So may we draw inspiration from the story of the Israelites and remember that just as God led them to the Promised Land, He will also guide us on our own journeys. Whether you are facing deserts of hardship or seeking your own Promised Land, remember that God is at your side, ready to give you strength, courage, and direction. So trust Him, move forward in faith, and let Him lead you to your destination of hope. How about taking the first step today? If you felt your heart touched by this message, share it with someone. Send the message in the family and friends group who needs hope and encouragement. Together, we can walk towards our destiny of faith. Don't forget to write on the channel. See you in the next video.